This video is brought to you by patreon.com/worsttake. Get access to exclusive live streams and Discord servers, on-screen shoutouts, and early access to some videos when you join now. Help make sure that we can continue to make content like this by supporting the Patreon. Links are in the description down below. At the end of this week, after the Browns played the Raiders, no matter what the result, the one thing we're going to spend a lot of time talking about is the potential return of two of the biggest heavy hitters on the Cleveland Browns offense, which is Nick Chubb and David Njoku. And the question is, can these two save the Browns offense? Is it even salvageable? Right now, the Browns offense is obviously not doing great. They could use any bit of help they could do. They're not a terrible rushing offense, but they're not very good. And they're the worst by like several different metrics, passing offense in the NFL. And the question is, how much does David Njoku change that? What can David Njoku change about that? And how much does Nick Chubb change things? Well, let's start with the conversation about Nick Chubb. How much is Nick Chubb worth? If you take a team that had Nick Chubb, pluck Nick Chubb off that team, what changes? Well, fortunately for us, we have an example we can look at. In 2020, the Cleveland Browns lost Nick Chubb because he was put on IR for 4 weeks. And with that sample of games, we actually have something we can look at and say, hey, this is a Browns team that played games that was relatively the same outside of losing Nick Chubb. And you can kind of use this to potentially measure Nick Chubb's impact on the Cleveland Browns. And I think it's fascinating. So he went on IR for 4 weeks. In the 4 weeks he was out, the Cleveland Browns offense averaged 18 first downs and had plus 2.84 expected points a game. So they were getting about 2.84 more points than they were expected to without Nick Chubb. So they weren't a terrible offense without Nick Chubb. Again, this is 2020. Your quarterback was playing very well in 2020 in Baker Mayfield. You had an excellent run game with Kareem Hunt as the backup, even without Nick Chubb. You also had Dearness Johnson back there, right? This was a pretty stacked Browns team. The only issue with it is that the defense wasn't great in 2020, but that offense was pretty good, had the best offensive line, the most efficient offensive line we have seen since 2020. That's how good that line was. So all you did was pluck Nick Chubb, and those were the numbers. But when Nick Chubb came back, or when Nick Chubb played for the Cleveland Browns in 2020, they jumped from 18 first downs to 24. So it's a +6 jump in first downs per game. The expected points jumped from 2.84 to plus 10.74. So that's about an 8-point jump for Nick Chubb. So if you use the math from that, you can surmise that Nick Chubb is worth about 8 points in 6 first downs, which to me does feel about right for Nick Chubb. Ultimately, this stat is just meant to kind of try to get a feel of what Nick Chubb's worth is to the offense, right? It's hard to quantify when you watch this offense with Nick Chubb. It looks so different no matter who's playing quarterback. And this feels like it does a good job of quantifying that. And if Nick Chubb is playing and he comes back this year, he plays at that level, right? Let's assume he plays at the level that he did in 2020 when he was coming off an injury as well. Obviously, if he can do that, that would be a huge boost to this team. I've never seen a team that could use 8 more points in 6 more first downs than this team. If the Browns scored 8 more points a game, they would probably be at least 2-1 at this point, if not 3-0 at this point. It makes a massive difference, right? If they could get those extra first downs, those extra points that you would get with Nick Chubb over expectation. To put this in perspective, if you add those 8 points a game plus those first 6 downs, the Browns jump from a team that ranks 28th in first downs to 5th in first downs. If you add the points to the Browns' point total right now, so you add the 24 points from 3 games, the Browns will jump from 25th in points to 9th. That's a massive boost. And the reason that's a massive boost to me is obvious. If you have Nick Chubb, now you have something to center the offense around. I think the issue for the Cleveland Browns right now offensively is that nobody is playing at a level where you can center anything offensively around them. Deshaun Watson isn't even close to playing at that level where you can center the offense around him. It's unfortunate because Deshaun Watson was once one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL, but now it's to the point where centering an offense around him is kind of a laughable idea when you look at how he's played and the efficiency of how he's played over the last few games. So I wouldn't recommend doing that. Unfortunately, I think something similar has happened with Amari Cooper. Like, I think he's still a really good player. He's coming off of a really good game, and he's going to put up some pretty decent numbers. But the last couple of years in 2022 and 2023, Amari Cooper was playing at a level where you can center the offense around him, and that's just not the case. A similar thing happened with David Njoku last year, where you could center the offense around the impact that David Njoku has. And with David Njoku being injured, it just takes away focal points for the offense. So if you look at the Browns offense right now, they got a lot of pretty good players in some areas, right? I think Jerry Jeudy's a pretty good player. I think Amari Cooper is a pretty good player. Offensive line has some holes in it, but you do have some pretty good players on the offensive line. Wyatt Teller, Ethan Posick, Joe Bitonio, sometimes DeJuan Jones. Even somebody like Jerome Ford, I wouldn't call him pretty good, but I would say he is above average, right? But the issue is who in that mix offensively are you really building a game plan around? You can't build a game plan around Jerry Jeudy. You can't build a game plan around Amari Cooper. You can't build a game plan around Deshaun Watson or Jerome Ford. So if you're the Browns, you got to kind of have your hands tied from a creativity standpoint because you don't really have a focal point offensively. That is a big issue for this team. If you get Nick Chubb back or David Njoku, because we'll talk about his impact to the team in just a minute, but if you get Nick Chubb or David Njoku back, that's adding 2 focal points to an offense that currently has 0. It'd be a big deal for this team. It'll open up a lot for this team. It'll allow them to have more of an identity. I know we've talked about it. The Browns don't feel like they have an identity. Well, that's true. An identity requires that you have focal points on whatever unit you're talking about having that identity to focus that unit on. The Legion of Boom does not exist because they had a good defensive coordinator and a good defensive game plan. The Legion of Boom exists because the extraordinary play of Richard Sherman, right? And the corners in the secondary and the individual players on the Legion of Boom, right? They had the same defensive coordinators other places. It wasn't the Legion of Boom. They had the same system other places. It wasn't the Legion of Boom. The identity is about the players, the focal points, right? The Browns had an identity as a run-first football team that plays smash-mouth defense and moves the ball like that. And you know how they created that identity? By running the ball with Nick Chubb. David Njoku and Amari Cooper filled in the gaps during the Nick Chubb injury last year, but Nick Chubb is the part of the reason the Browns have this identity as a run-first team, because that identity is based off of the exploits of Nick Chubb running the football. So right then and there, Nick Chubb coming back just adds a huge boost to this team simply because he gives this team a focus offensively. So you can build things off of it, right? You have something to build off of. The Browns offense has nothing to build off of right now. They don't scare teams running the ball, so why would play action work? They definitely don't scare teams throwing the ball. I mean, I think teams are begging you to do this at this point, so that's not going to work, right? You have nothing to make the defense focus in on. You have no focal point. You have no identity. And Nick Chubb coming back gives you an identity, especially if he's playing at that same high Nick Chubb level. Now let's talk about David Njoku. What does David Njoku bring to this Cleveland Browns team? Similarly, just like Nick Chubb. He's somebody who you can focus the offense around, right? You can kind of get a game plan going of getting David Njoku in motion. Also, I think David Njoku's huge for pass protections, right? He's the best chip blocker, I think, in the league, or one of the best chip blockers out there at the tight end position. He's also somebody who can be really useful as a dynamic threat downfield. You talk about yards after catch. He's the yards after catch king from the tight end position. There's a lot of reasons, right? Run blocking. That's been something that's been an issue. The Browns haven't been able to get good run blocking from their non-offensive lineman players, right? Their tight ends, their wide receivers downfield. It hasn't been great. Having David Njoku gives you another wrinkle you can throw in that run game because he's an excellent run blocker. Another thing that he does is makes decision making for the quarterback a lot simpler, right? Because you can always rely on just dumping that shit off to David Njoku. I'm dead serious. That's part of, like, that was like 30% of Joe Flacco's plan was, okay, it's crazy, I'm going to just throw it to David. And it worked out because David's that good of a player, right? So when you have a quarterback who's clearly struggling with the processing element of the game, as mystifying as it is that he is doing this after being a all-pro and a 3-time Pro Bowler, but my fascination with the fall off of Deshaun Watson aside, he's struggling with processing. You want to make that easier. David Njoku makes that easier. And I think the biggest impact that David Njoku and Nick Chubb have is that it takes the pressure of the offense off of Deshaun Watson. And the more you can do that, the better it is for the offense. And right now, the Browns have to lean on Deshaun Watson to create a lot for this offense. So we're compounding a problem and making that problem worse, right? Deshaun Watson's not playing well. The offensive line is also not playing well. The offensive line doesn't pass block well. Deshaun Watson doesn't respond to pressure well. And then on top of all of that, right, those two problems compounding on top of each other, right, the offensive line, Deshaun Watson, what is compounding on all of those things is that the Browns don't have any other real options to resort to offensively other than trying to make something happen with their very expensive quarterback, which is, again, compounding a problem on top of another problem that's going on top of a problem, and the whole thing is just breaking in on itself, right? If you have David Njoku and Nick Chubb, all of a sudden the pressure of Deshaun Watson on this offense just releases a little bit because now it's a lot simpler for Deshaun Watson. It's not about him having to throw the ball 35 times. Hell, you might even get away with just having him throw the ball 20 times like they're doing out there in Los Angeles with the Chargers. Lower the pass attempts for Deshaun Watson, lower the load of the offense on Deshaun Watson, lower the impact that he has on the game because you can run the ball with Nick Chubb a ton. And even when he does throw, you can take some of the mental load off of him by just telling him to throw that shit to David Njoku, right? Because that's another guy you could focus on. And then once defenses get tired of that, you can use Amari Cooper and you can use Jerry Jeudy. And I think you'll be a lot more of an efficient offense, regardless of who's playing quarterback, when you have these guys out here because they just give teams more to focus on. Not having David Njoku, not having Nick Chubb, especially if you're not going to have great quarterback play, has hurt this offense immensely because they have nothing to be the focal point of the offense right now. So if you're asking me, can Nick Chubb and David Njoku save the Browns offense? I think the answer is yes, but they're not saving the Browns offense. Nick Chubb and David Njoku kind of are the Browns offense. That's my thoughts. Let me know what you think in the comment section down below. Y'all have a great day. Have a better night. Peace.